Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
Welcome to MacBreak Studio. I'm your host, Brian Gary, and today in the studio, we've got Andy Beach, author of Real-World Video Compression. And what I really like about that book, and I've said it before, and I think they even have a quote up on the Peach Pit website, you are the Carl Sagan of encoding. You are bringing encoding to the masses. You're making it understandable, everything. I try
to tell it like it is, you know?
Yeah, but in the same way that Stephen Hawking, so you're Carl Sagan or Hawking, in A Brief History of Time, is talking about black holes, but in words that people can understand. Oh. In your book, same thing. It's words people can understand.
It's always complicated stuff, and this is always the thing that trips people up when they're trying to get their project out. And so what's important is to figure out a little bit about it, and then figure out what you need to know, and then what you can ignore.
What you can ignore.
Yep.
And so what you're going to be showing us today is a tool that will give you information that will inform those decisions.
That's exactly right. Yeah, what we have today is there's a great little tool that I've used for years, both on PCs and Macs actually, called MediaInfo. And one of the things that I always have happen is someone asks me, well, how did they encode that? How did they encode those Apple trailers? How did they include that YouTube trailer? Mm-hmm. You know, and you can't guess from just looking at it. So what MediaInfo lets you do is it lets you take a sneak peek behind the curtains at what the various settings and what the different knobs that were turned on and off for that clip might be. So it's a great way if you're trying to deconstruct a piece of media.
Right.
To use, and it's super simple. All you do is launch it and then literally just drag a clip in, and immediately you start seeing all the information, and it really breaks it down for you in terms of the codec that was used, the little things like the runtime and the file size, but then you start really digging into the actual encode library that was used, or the file size or the frame size, the resolution, the total number of frames within it, and all of this is the type of info that lets you then try to go back to your encoder of choice and recreate those settings. So if I start looking at videos online and I want to try to recreate it, the first thing I do is pull it up in MediaInfo, try to figure it out. Second thing is when I'm doing some encoding and it's not working, like I encode something and it won't load on my iPhone, first thing I do is pop it into here and I start looking at the various settings to try and figure out what's exactly wrong with it and why won't it load. So a good example here is when I did these two clips, they're almost identical when we start looking at them, but the one thing that's different, and one of these would load and one on my iPhone and one wouldn't, is I noticed right away that this was main profile and everything else really needs to be baseline profile. So right away I saved myself probably about 2 hours of just messing around with different components trying to figure out what was wrong, all because of MediaInfo.
Yeah, and what I like about this is not only is it kind of laid out very simple and very easy to use, is that it really does go to a level of depth that you don't find in the Get Info window of QuickTime, you don't find it in Compressor or some of the other apps that people are used to using. And so a lot of this stuff is just kind of guesswork in the background.
Yeah, a lot of times this is stuff you don't see in other places. So it's a great way of sniffing and finding out what that is. And then there's super easy things to try and just save it out too and export it so that you can keep it as a reference to go back and do it. So this almost becomes a way for me of building out my little recipe book of how I store all my various settings.
Right.
Once I have something that I know was great, I'll export this and then I'll have that text file in my Dropbox or somewhere else, and if I need to remember what the setting was and when I'm offsite or doing something else, I go sneak and grab this and check it out.
Now this is a free application, correct? Both
Absolutely.
Mac and PC, it's free?
Yep.
So you could Google MediaInfo Mac and you're going to find the website. So it's open source, or is it one person developing it?
It was an open source project. So yeah, it's out there and it's free to use, and frankly more people should use it.
Well, there you go. Some real world, again, Andy's book. It's all about real world video encoding techniques and tips and tricks and understanding what you're doing. And the key to understanding what you're doing is having all the information available to you. MediaInfo Mac does that. Andy, thanks for coming in.
Thanks a lot, Brian.
And thank you all for watching MacBreak Studio. I'm Brian Gary.